please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
We are outspoken about our optimism. These days, though, optimism seems to be in short supply, says the first line of the 10th annual letter from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a digest that the philanthropist couple releases every year to mark the priorities of their foundation that spends nearly $4 billion a year to help reduce poverty, improve education, and women's health around the world. This year, however, the annual letter lists 10 tough questions the couple gets asked. And we have Melinda Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, joining us straight from Seattle to tell us exactly why. Melinda, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. 10 tough questions that you answer in your annual letter. Why choose this theme?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me today. And we chose this theme. We've been doing an annual letter for 10 years, and it's really, we use it to mark progress and we show and demonstrate what the foundation's work is. But this year, Bill and I decided to take the 10 toughest questions that we're being asked. And some of these questions we've been hearing the last 5 or 6 years. A few of them are new this year. But we thought for openness and transparency, and so people understand who we are and what our values are that we're living out in the world, it would be good to take these 10 tough questions that we're often asked in private and really write about them and explain to people how we think about things.
Well, of these 10, which one has been the toughest?
Well, there are quite a few of them in there that are tough. I think one of the toughest ones that we get asked is about working with the current U.S. administration. That seems to be very top of mind for people both in the United States and as I've been traveling abroad in the last year. And so we needed to answer that honestly. And the honest truth is that we work with any administration, no matter who's in office in the United States or really in any country. But it does have an effect. It has an effect on foreign aid dollars. This administration put forward big cuts in foreign aid. Luckily, the Congress held those up. And what it gives Bill and I a chance to explain is the importance of those foreign aid dollars in helping countries lift themselves out of poverty. Those investments that not only the U.S. government makes, but governments around the world make are vitally important in terms of countries moving from low income to middle income and more prosperity.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when you touch upon the direction of the policy changes in the United States, we are seeing similar scenarios in other parts of the world as well. You know, the world is turning more uncertain. We are seeing government's priorities change. In this changing dynamics, how does Gates Foundation align the goals and priorities?
Well, we really align the priorities around what was originally the Millennium Development Goals that were set by the United Nations by 169 nations many years ago. Those were recently updated to the Sustainable Development Goals. And those goals that were set are a blueprint and a roadmap for where the world needs to work in order for it to improve. And so we select a number of those that we feel like we have particular learnings and expertise in over many years, and those are the ones we go after. Things like childhood mortality or maternal mortality or children's deaths under the age of 5. And to be honest, that is on the minds of many presidents and prime ministers that I meet with, including your own. They are very interested in getting those death rates down so that children survive. And then we work on the other piece, like nutrition, so that kids actually thrive and can get a great education and go on to live whatever life it is that they want to live, a very fulfilling life full of human potential.
Right. So of the other topics that you touch upon in your letter, like that of women's and child health and climate change, which ones do you think should be the topmost priority for countries like that of India, those that have similar demographics and economic conditions?
Well, Bill and I see those as equally important topics, honestly, for the same reason, which is, first of all, if you start with health, if a child can grow up with good health, or a mother doesn't die in childbirth, she can raise with her husband those kids, and they can go on to, if they grow up basically healthy and they get well fed, they can go on to have a great education and they can go on to have a prosperous life and participate in the economy. Whereas the converse is true, if you don't grow up with great health, you get locked into the cycle of poverty. So I'd like to say that human development is the most important thing, and it is the thing that we spend the most time and resources on as a foundation. Unfortunately, we're in a situation, though, as a world, that you also have to pay attention to climate change. And for much of the same reason, most of the people who live in rural India are still agrarians. They live, they're farmers. And so they are affected, just like the farmers in Africa, just like the farmers in the United States. We are affected by climate change. And when you go and talk to the farmers in remote UP or Bihar, they will tell you that the rains are coming differently, their fields are getting flooded for longer periods of time. So we need to make sure new seeds get out there. One of them that we highlight in the annual letter is the super rice seed that can stay underwater longer, and you can still get a higher yield off of your plot of land. That food is vitally important for any family, not only because of what they feed their family and their kids, but also what they can then put on the market and the income that they can earn from it. So governments these days, and it's why these 169 nations have signed up to a whole set of sustainable development goals, all the way from human development to education and to climate change. They're all important.
So would we see Gates Foundation get involved in climate change projects more proactively now?
Well, we already are involved in climate change in the foundation in the sense that we are trying to come up with our partners with new seeds that are drought resistant, that go against more of the pest and disease that people are experiencing, farmers around the world, smallholder farmers, and that are flood resistant. So we're already involved in that sense. And then on the personal side, Bill and I also make investments outside the foundation to have new innovative technologies come forward that will help us with climate change. So we're actually investing on both sides. But we've been working on the seed work actually now for over a decade.
Well, let me then talk to you about a subject that you are very passionate about, women's health and family planning. What has been the progress, on family planning per se in a country like that of India, and what have been your key challenges?
India has made substantial progress in family planning in the last 5 years. I've been so impressed. Ever since the 2012 Family Planning Summit, where the world came together in London to commit to putting family planning back on the global health agenda, India has been at the top of the list about looking at its policies related to family planning and making change.
So in this work that you do on contraception and family planning, what has been the biggest challenge in India?
Well, I think in India, it's a very large country, and even state by state, things are quite different in the north and in the south. So, a state like UP with 200 million people, reaching women in those far remote rural locations at the foothills of the Himalayas. I've been in those communities. They are far away. And so keeping the supply chain working all the way out there, that is a challenge. Making sure that the ASHA workers are well educated about family planning, not just about one tool like the IUD that's been available in India for a very long time, but some of the new tools as well. Making sure the ASHA workers carry that message out and carry it appropriately. Those are still challenges in India because those remote rural places, the ASHA workers aren't always as well educated as they should be, and the remote rural clinics aren't really often clinics. Sometimes they're very, very rough situations that they're in.
Well, I was reading that you've allocated about $80 million for collecting women's data. What has been the progress and what does the initial readings tell you? Also, does India feature in that study on women's data?
Yes, and so we have brought together a whole host of partners together to really look at investing in data on behalf of women. Because one of the things we started to realize is, what the world measures is what the world actually gets done. And if you look at the data on women, it's actually very weak in some places, or slim or non-existent. And some of the data we actually have about women, some of the surveys we do about families are quite biased. I'll give you an example, which is the best surveying out there that has been done for over 30 years is something called the household survey. It's used in country by country. It's a very long survey, but as soon as they ask who in the household has income, and the man, usually the man answers, culturally that's most appropriate for him to answer first. As soon as he says he has income, we never even go and ask the woman about whether she has income. And yet we know so many women in India and in places in Africa have income. They get it through the informal sector, and they're often the ones on the hook for the kids' health, for paying for the health crisis, or when the school fees come due, to contributing some from the household budget and income. So that question alone is really important if we're going to learn how to get more income in the hands of women. So anyway, this coalition has come together to make sure that we start to collect more data on women. So we made the announcement a couple of years ago. It's taken a while to lay some of that groundwork, but we are starting to see the surveying happening, and I'll be interested in a year from now to tell you more about what we're learning from it.
Let's shift focus to health. Eradicating diseases is also on top priority list for Gates Foundation. You are closing in on polio globally. Malaria is next on the list. In your assessment, what are the low-hanging fruits that the foundation is chasing? And if we can put India on that map, how does it look?
Well, so we've had this goal of polio eradication now for quite some time, honestly, for the last 7 years. And India was a leader in polio eradication. It was we were down to about 4 places in the world where polio was still endemic. That is, we never cut the transmission of polio as a world. And India committed to it, and India got it done. And so the lessons that we can draw from that India learned itself about its health system, and also what they left behind in terms of strengthening the health system, those are lessons we're now taking to other places to get polio eradication done. We're now down to less than 30 cases in the world, about that a year. We're at that last hardest to reach mile. But if we can get polio eradicated, it means it will only be the second human disease that's ever been eradicated from the face of the planet, but it means we can get other diseases. And so India shows the way on something like polio. India is showing the way on childhood mortality. There's still, high numbers of child mortality in India. The government is very committed, both at the federal and the state level, bringing those numbers down. But India is creating products, low-cost products. That is a rotavirus vaccine, which is a diarrheal disease, and a pneumococcus, a pneumonia disease. Those are the 2 biggest killers of children worldwide. But India bringing those products out and delivering them and helping us deliver them at low cost to get those vaccines, wow, that's a gift to the world. So more and more, we look to India as a shining example that we can highlight to the rest of the world and say, for about the same income level, you all can make the same gains that India is making if you make these types of investments, or you learn these lessons that India has learned for itself in its health system. And it's a really great example that we can share all over the world, and that we do.
Well, you speak of the work that you've done in vaccines, particularly in India. But in the last 2 years, we've seen that the Indian government seems to be increasingly more distrustful of foreign funds. So in that light, how is the progress of the vaccine work that you're doing here? And how is your relationship with the Indian government firming up?
Well, we have a fantastic relationship with the government, and I think the government sees things the same way we do, which is if you care about childhood deaths, which they do, you put it as a goal for the nation, and then you drive it through the health system. And that is exactly what India is doing. And they're looking at the 2 biggest killers of children, pneumonia and diarrhea, and saying, how do we take up those vaccines, take them up well, take up an Indian version of them, and get them out to everybody that needs them, even in those remote rural places. And they're absolutely doing that. So we couldn't be more proud of the work that the government of India is doing, and they're doing it, in our view, they're really going about it in the right way. And the way we know that is you see the childhood deaths coming down. You see infant mortality coming down. You see under 5 mortality coming down. And you're seeing the right things start to happen in maternal mortality. Those numbers are coming down. And they're driving more women into the health system for deliveries and of babies, and they're making the health system stronger and better for women. There's more work to do, but they see it themselves, and they're taking that system apart and trying to figure out how to make it better for moms and for babies. And that's exactly right.
In your annual letter, you also speak about cooperations with companies like that of J&J. And if I link it to your philanthropy funding through your Giving Pledge program in India, how are these 2 cooperations progressing? one with companies and the other with the wealthiest in India?
Well, we work with a whole host of Indian companies, both pharmaceutical companies who are making vaccines and drugs, as well as cell phone companies. India's passed a fantastic regulation in the last 2 years to allow mobile money in the country. And because you've got the Aadhaar system, you're seeing the uptake of mobile accounts and the usage of them skyrocket in India. And what's great about that is it means a family that's out in a remote rural area can save a few rupees a day, more rupees the next day. And then when the school fees come due, they actually have that money. Or if there's a health crisis, they've actually got the money on their phone. So we engage with a whole host of private sector partners in India. And the way we think of philanthropy and that we work with the Indian philanthropists is we think of what is government's role, what is the private sector role, what's the NGO and civil society's role, and what's philanthropy's role. And so we're working with a host of fantastic Indian philanthropists who've already been at this work for some time, and there's some new ones coming into it to say, this is how we view philanthropy, how do you all see it, and what are areas that you want to work on for India and for the world, and how do we collaborate together?
Well, Melinda Gates, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV18.